In this episode, we talk to Drew Hinton from Aero Safety about the Firefighter Building Marking System, what it is, and how your business could benefit by helping responders understand hazards at your facility. This is a good one. I always enjoy talking to Drew with Aero Safety. You can learn more about Aero Safety at aerosafetyus.com. Also, if you didn't get a chance to listen to episode 168 with Nick Morrill from Cavcom, you're missing out. Go back and take a listen to that episode. Also, be sure to check out Cavcom. You know, hearing conservation programs rarely work when hearing protection products restrict your workers' ability to hear their surroundings and or communicate with coworkers. We talk a lot about it in that episode. So when employees can't communicate effectively, everything related to safety and productivity diminishes, right? Their whole world gets much, much smaller. So you can't have both. You can't have hearing protection and enhanced communications. And Cavcom's made in the USA hearing protection solutions enhance all forms of communication, including situational awareness, face-to-face, two-way communication, without sacrificing hearing protection. Cavcom can provide a personalized hearing protection ROI for your facility, on-site evaluations, and free equipment trials. Contact them at cavcominc.com or call 866-547-4988. Now let's get into today's episode. Before we get into today's topic, I have one question for you. Are you still painting your floors for 5S markings, things like that? Don't do that. Head over to mightylinetape.com/podcast, a great partner in safety. They've been with us from the beginning. They have some really good products that are going to get you out of a whole lot of time, material, and maintenance and upkeep. Their floor marking tape is second to none. It takes up easily, doesn't leave a sticky residue. They've got floor tape with beveled edges for forklift traffic, carts, things like that. So it really holds up well to that kind of traffic in your facility. They also can do custom floor signs. If you have a particular logo or a message, they can make that happen. Get a free sample and try it for yourself. Again, head over to mightylinetape.com/podcast. Tell them that we sent you. You will get a free sample to try out in your facility today. Again, mightylinetape.com/podcast. Drew Hinton, Aero Safety. How you doing, Drew?
Good, Blaine. How you doing this morning?
Doing all right. It's early for you, so I appreciate you jumping on. You're on. No, wait. Are you on Eastern Standard Time?
I'm on Eastern Time right now, so I'm with you. It's almost 8:00. So
yeah, there you go. All right. So, look, the topic that we're going to talk about, you and I were text, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, about building marking systems, right? The Firefighter building marking system. Now, we started talking about this, and I have seen different ways of marking building doors and breaking up maps into zones. Our good friend Sean Rafferty, for his workplace violence and the law enforcement entry guide that he produces for businesses and schools, especially schools, takes this approach of breaking up into zones and marking doors so it's easier for responders to know which side of the building to position and to make entry, stuff like that.
Right.
So let's dive into this topic. What is the Firefighter building marking system, and how can it benefit facilities managers, building owners, and managers in response?
Yeah, so it's a Firefighter Safety Building Marking System, and like you were talking about, there's no easy acronym to help out with remembering that. But what it is, it looks like it's Maltese cross. So if you're familiar with the fire department or not familiar with it, it's kind of the fire department logo or the emblem. And so what it does is it identifies all of the hazards, or most of the major hazards of that particular facility. And it's designed for first responders showing up on scene, fire department showing up on scene. So I always explain to it is it's similar in concept as the 704 diamond, the red, blue, yellow, white diamond. That has no effect on the building occupants. That is strictly for first responders showing up. So this firefighter safety building marking system, what it does, it'll identify the type of construction. Is it, fire resistive, non-combustible? Is it combustible, ordinary construction? Gets into whether it has a sprinkler system or not, the fire loads, any special hazards inside of it. So it's a pretty intricate system. It's been around for at least 10 years. I know it was in the NFPA 1 standard, and I know it was covered in the 2012 edition. Prior to that, 2009, I'm not sure if it was covered, but it's been around for at least 10 years. But they'll put in, like, the latest edition, NFPA 1 is the 2021 edition, and it's in Annex C. And the very first thing it says is that it's not mandatory unless adopted by the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction. So
Right.
that's why some people may or may not see it across the country. I know in Louisville, where I worked at the fire department, we had started at the time, we had started to adopt that, and now, like, the east side of Louisville all has adopted that. So every commercial facility you go to you should be seeing that marking system on the address side of the facility.
Now, what's different here is, traditionally you'll have numbered doors and east 1, east 2, west 1, west 2, so which
Right.
side of the building you're on. This is different because it actually informs responders of what you said, hazards and construction material and potential contents, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it gets
Okay.
into, whether it's got truss floors. I've seen some variations of the standard, which I don't really know if it's probably not supposed to do that, but I've seen some variations of, not really the standard, but how people apply it in their jurisdiction. So, but they'll get into, like, truss floors, truss roofs, like I said, is it heavy timber construction? One that's, usually was our first go-to, or what we looked at specifically within that marking system, was the middle section, which is special hazards. And so we
Right.
may see like you may see pool on there that lets us know there's a pool in there, which means it's going to be chlorine and pool chemicals inside that facility. Or they may have HM for hazmat. There's a large quantity of hazardous materials on site. So it's a very beneficial system. But like I said, it's just a matter of whether or not your AHJ is going to adopt that or not, as far as whether you might see it. But it's a very beneficial system for first responders to give them a heads up, because some of those construction types, one, they may be deceiving. They may look like one construction type, be another. But
Right.
also, like I said, it gets into sprinkler systems. Is it fully automatic sprinklers? Is it partially sprinklered? Does it got a standpipe system in it? Or does it not have anything at all? So it gives them an idea of what they can hook up to or not hook up to.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of the disaster site worker program, from years ago,
Mm-hmm.
when I got into that. It was after Katrina. How you would see markings on houses and buildings,
Yeah.
just spray paint, literally, to inform contractors, cleanup crews, service workers, utilities workers, even responders, of, hey, what might be in this building.
Right.
The problem was, like, then there was no program at the time, which now the disaster site worker uh, program, it was an outreach training program, came about. I don't know the current state of it, whether it's still considered useful or not, that training program, but that was the issue, was like, okay, we've got this marking, so we got this way of marking all these structures. Who knows about these? Like, that's the other problem. So help us understand the firefighter, the building marking system. This is for responders,
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
This isn't for building occupants to inform. This doesn't satisfy any HAZCOM labeling requirements or
Right.
anything like that. This is strictly for responders.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what they should be doing, even in the standard, it's going to be a should versus a shall. But what they're supposed to be doing is, you're training your personnel on what those marking systems mean, how to interpret it, but also during their annual inspections, they're supposed to be checking those things as well, to make sure, one, they're up there and they didn't take it down within the last 6 months or so, and then
Yeah.
two, that it's hasn't been defaced, it's the proper ones on there. We got when we first started implementing it in Louisville, there was, we kind of gave them a grace period and say, hey, here's what you got to do. Here's some facility, here's some companies that can make this for you. Here's a rough estimate on the cost. here's the specs on that stuff. But then we'd give them like a grace period of, hey, we're going to come back in a couple of months and check on it. After that, they start issuing them fines and citations from a a jurisdictional standpoint. But I mean, especially from an inexperienced firefighter standpoint that doesn't know how to identify those things right off the bat, they can just look at this Maltese cross and tell. One of the big benefits of, if they're not familiar with the structure, maybe they didn't do their pre-planning like they're supposed to, but they're not familiar with the structure of what's inside of it. One of them it talks about the hazards, so basically the fuel loads. So is it a low, medium, or high hazard? Is it gonna have things that's gonna burn rapidly and explode, or is it something that's gonna just burn kind of normal, not really fast expansion? But then there's also another section of it gets into occupant hazards associated with just the occupancy itself. So is it like is it a business facility? It's just a strict commercial business, like a storefront, or is it a school to where, for the most part, I can evacuate those people fairly easily, versus like a high hazard occupancy would be like a correctional facility to where I've got all kinds of locks and hoops that I have to jump through in order to get these people out. So it helps them, one, they're in pre-planning, but especially if I didn't do my pre-planning properly, and especially for newer firefighters and newer personnel, helps them just get a quick glance. I mean, just like I said, just like the 704 diamond, it just gives me a quick heads up of, hey, here's your hazards. Let's dive into it a little further, but it gives me a quick heads up as what those hazards are.
Yeah, and I've been in this situation several times in my past with different companies, and when you update or change processes where you introduce new hazards, where maybe it's still the same hazard category, a hazardous material, but it's a different type of chemical that requires a special type of mitigation, right? And
Right.
so always have this on if you follow any kind of management of change process, have this on your template checklist when you go through change management, to reach out, have a question. Does this require informing the local responders of this new chemical that,
Yeah.
that maybe requires a new approach? And I always told this story of a facility that was somewhat new, like not even 2 years old, and they had uh, an acid etch process with acid bath, and the byproduct was hydrofluoric acid, HF.
Nasty stuff.
And in the fume hood, if the fume hood went down, then the heat from the liquid tanks, the vapors would still be produced, and it would fill up that room. Long story short, the firefighters weren't aware of this, and their gear wasn't rated for that,
Right.
to stand that type of, their gear would have been compromised. So they were looking at potentially having to purchase all new gear if there were an event. And even if it's just a power outage at that facility, if the ventilation system went down in that room. So one of the requirements, that when I got there, one of the requirements was like, y'all need a backup generator.
Right.
You need, at least for this process, to keep that ventilation going.
Yeah.
We invited them in to walk through, and they were like, oh, wow, we had no idea. And the one thing you do is you invite the department leadership to come through. You don't just call the fire station and say, hey, do you guys want to come and do a walkthrough? And it's just whoever the firefighters are on that shift, right?
Yeah.
You want leadership to come through and do a walkthrough, because you want this to be a strategic plan that
Right.
can be cascaded down through the various various stations and personnel, because you never know who's going to be filling in that day, or who's working 24 on, 48 off, and who's going to respond.
Right.
So that's another mistake people make, right? Is they just call the fire department, and they send the engine crew with maybe the captain or the lieutenant, and they walk through with a couple firefighters. And you want to make sure you get leadership involved, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I've seen, I got a customer that did that exact same thing. I guess about a year or so ago, they added additional hydrogen tanks in their facility, and they had the local fire department in their area come out there, and they notified, like you said, they notified the leadership, they called the chief up and said, "Hey, we're adding on these additional hydrogen tanks to our facility. Do you want to have all 3 crews come out here?" And so when they come out there, they had, we were explaining the risk of it, because I was working with the customer at the time, and we were explaining the risk of where everything was at, how much quantities we have, and then their leadership was, walking their crews through the process of, hey, how are we going to respond to this, right? So you may have an inexperienced captain out there that's just freshly been promoted. It's not really going to be, they're not experienced, but kind of they've been able to pass that officer's exam and got bumped up there. But definitely, like you said, including leadership on there, because they typically the more experienced people, and they can help facilitate those good discussions from their standpoint. And then then they can take that and even turn it over to the host facility and say, here's what we're going to do when we show up on site. We're going to need one of your maintenance crews or engineers or whatever it is to accompany us with this because of these hazards.
And yeah, it's a partnership, absolutely. And the thing that a lot of folks miss, and we talk about, and you just touched on it, I mentioned it earlier, is you would be surprised at how, and this is not a dig on our professional responders in any way, shape, or form,
right?
But it's reality, and that is, you would be surprised at how little equipment they have sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That they're like, oh, wait, you have people going into this vault or into this tank. We have no way of getting them out.
Right.
Confined space entry, right? Not to go down that rabbit hole, but no pun intended. But you would be surprised the benefit of having the responders, those that are going to come in at the worst possible time in your facility, come in and save people, and yes, protect property. The more they know about your facility and what's in it and how it works, the better, right?
Yeah.
So it goes the other way too. I worked with another company where we went through, it was HF, another one. I had a run of hydrofluoric acid projects.
You're dangerous to hang around.
It was creepy stuff. But they had an HF elimination program in place, and they were able to eliminate HF from their building. So because they used alternative processes, they tested it with their products. They got the customers to approve this alternative method of cleaning and etching the parts and all that good stuff, and eliminated HF. So whenever you kind of de-escalate, so to speak, you use less hazardous materials or equipment, or you knock yourself out of a hazard category.
Right.
Same thing, right? Because that could delay response. If they assume this hazard is still there, they may be donning special equipment when they get there, which takes them longer to get in. And so, you want to make sure you communicate any change that would alter the classification of your building or contents or materials, right?
Right. Yeah. Because most of these, they should be coming around doing their annual fire inspections, but if I made my change right after that annual inspection, they're not going to know about it until essentially a year later, in which a lot of things can happen within a year span. They may have, it may be as simple as a small fire, maybe a hazmat incident, maybe, heaven forbid, an active shooter situation, whatever it may be. They need to know about what those hazards are on that site. Like I said, it may go a decent amount of time before they're made aware of it if you don't do it as a host facility.
Yeah, and that brings up another one, is gaining entry. A lot of buildings now have key cards, and so do you have a master key card that is in the Knox box? And where, this is somewhat of a trick question, I want to see what you say, but where do you typically find the Knox box, and how many?
Front of the facility, and half the time it's like 10 foot up in the air because they don't want it to be seen. You got to go grab a ladder to get to it.
Right. It's in the front. And, we always try to get multiple views, at least 3, right, views we when we approach. You don't typically want to stage right outside the door or the wall where the hazard is, right? So another piece of advice, would you recommend having multiple Knox boxes? Because you don't know which entry they may need to make, right? Which side of the building?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're involving multiple buildings at your site, right?
Yep.
So, that's a trap, just like you just talked about. It's a kind of a trap that employers fall into. Okay, we got a Knox box, let's put it up here. And like I said, they think it's ugly, so they try to hide it. And like I said, they'll I've seen several facilities, they'll put it up 10 foot up in the air, and you got to go grab an A-frame ladder to get to it.
Mhm.
But if you're pulling around in the back of the facility to the shipping entrance, then it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if I'm having to go back and forth just to get that Knox box, and then I got to get back in the rig, pull all the way back around to the shipping entrance, and then go from there. It's a big
Right.
delay in doing what I need to do.
Yeah, and I learned this one from our friend Sean as well with the law enforcement response. They're not going to go to the front door a lot of the times. They
Right.
may stop at the first entry that they see. So having that box, where and they're not going to have a key. They're not going to have a Knox box. So there's an alternative method for them with a passcode that dispatch can actually relay to the responding officers. Um,
Hmm.
Problem with that is folks listen to scanners and then they'll go, oh, I know the code to get in, and you'll have to
Right.
change it every time. But like there are challenges. There are real challenges for responders, police, fire, EMS,
Yeah.
um, getting access to a building when the building's mentality is, how do I keep people out, right? And then the responders are all like, how can we get in? They don't always work together.
Right.
So that's funny. Do you have any crazy forced entry stories? Unique ways that you've had to make entry?
I mean, we. I remember going
Wow.
on a medical run, and this woman was like paranoid of her neighbors. So she had four deadbolts on her on her door,
My goodness.
and we're trying to break in. We ended up having to go through a window, but um, we had. But to your point, we've had to do that. So showing up at facilities from the fire department, showing up at facilities, and the front door was locked, and there wasn't somebody at the front desk. But that was the first place we pulled up to. So now we had to go, door to door, side doors, back doors, to try to find somewhere to get in there, knocking on the windows to try to get somebody's attention because, maybe it's just a commercial fire alarm and they're in there trying to silence it like they're not supposed to be doing. And
Right.
we're just trying to find a way in, and nobody's at the front door. So again, sometimes you got to improvise and find your way in there. And but that comes that, like you said, pre-planning. If there's a passcode that you can find or some kind of security card that you can put into the Knox box, it helps alleviate some of that. But there's always going to be that one facility that kind of throws it for a loop.
I got one for you. The main panel for the alarm system and everything that went in, the main panel. It was near a door, but the door was not one at the main entrance, and it wasn't in a conspicuous area. It was grass and a little section of sidewalk, and it was right past the giant generator, a huge generator that was installed. And so the generator obscured the door from the road, right? The building was on a corner of a more of a main, high traffic road, and then
Right.
there was a little side street. It was this door, one of many doors to this manufacturing facility. It was on that side street there, but it was obscured by this generator. So right inside that door, you go inside the door, you're in a cage. The cage has a key card where all the employees have to swipe to gain
Hmm.
access. So you got to swipe the door, then you got to swipe the cage to get in, and then right outside of that cage is the main panel, the rise. Everything's coming into the building right there.
Right.
That also is the same room where they had three pressure furnaces, pressure ovens, like Ibsen, like 72 inch, like these huge pressure furnaces where they would do some annealing with parts and
Right.
stuff. Well, one of those had a runaway event, had
Mm.
you know, overheated. It just would not shut off and produced a ton of smoke and soot in that room, just completely. The video camera was crazy how it just filled the whole room and obscured the video and everything. Well, then the alarms are going off. Well, that's where you have to go.
Yeah.
That's where the panel was. The panel wasn't located in the front office that you're less likely to have an event occur.
Yeah. Away from
Right.
all the hazards.
Yeah, so we working with the local responders after that, it was interesting where they're like, well, that's going to cost a lot to move that. So how do we enclose it? How do we, like, it was just crazy. And people don't think when they expand into their facilities and they're like, well, we'll just expand this area. We'll knock this wall down and eliminate some cubicles. And then we'll put the, we'll put the chemical storage and battery charging station there. So we have floor room over here. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What are you impacting? Right. So change management, you got to have safety involved in all to be able to see and look around corners and look ahead for that kind of stuff. Have you seen in your experience, and firefighters have the best stories, but just the weirdest building configurations? Like, why would they put this here? Like stuff like that?
Yeah, no, actually, we seen a chemical plant, very similar setup as what you had, where you were just mentioning, where they had a fenced-in area for the truckers, but it was almost identical to what you were saying. That was on the back side of the facility, was where everything was located, all their risers, all their panels. But that typically wasn't where they go to. They go to like I said, they go to the front. But sometimes they would tell them, we made a run, and they told us to come around the rear entrance, and that's what we were doing. Is we were sitting there at the gate, like, okay, we're going to give you about 30 seconds, or we're just going to tear this gate down and make our way in.
Right. You have to knock, I guess.
Right.
Knock. That's interesting. Yeah, it's always funny to hear these stories about, like, and it's hindsight bias. You look back, you look at that and go, well, it makes sense that you shouldn't have this here.
Right.
But somebody didn't think so at the time, and probably
signed off on it and said it was okay.
Yeah, or like you said, there were things not in that room, like in my story. That was an expansion. That room was a storage room, and it was an entryway, like a side entrance where folks could come in. And it made sense at the time. The problem is when they expanded into that room and repurposed it from, like, just a maintenance area, like storage area for, parts and dies and, metal parts and stuff. They added these furnaces, which ended up being more of a high hazard area. It never occurred to anybody that that's where all the risers are coming in. Like, can you imagine if that furnace ran away from them, got away from them, and took out the risers to the whole building?
It'd be a bad day.
Yeah. I mean, that you've got no protection, none whatsoever. So anyway, yeah, good stuff. All right. What are your tips and advice for companies? Like, hey, should we use a system like this? Does the local fire department even follow this? Like, this all makes sense to me, and I like a universal system, but as you said, not everybody's following it because it's a recommendation, which begs the question why we would put it in a code book if you're not required. But
yeah, I mean, at a minimum, getting your local fire department out there to talk to them and seeing, do you all even follow this? Is it part of your city ordinance or code or whatever that you all actually enforce? Because it's not going to do any benefit if you go say, okay, I saw this in, safety professional says, hey, I saw this in a standard, heard it on, the local community. I'm going to go make this sign and put it up on our facility. And then the fire department's like, what is this thing? Right. So it doesn't really benefit you, but so you can call them out there and one, they can give you advice on how to classify everything, what the proper way to put it in, because it even gets into the dimensions on, how wide it's supposed to be, the width, the height, all that stuff. And so they can help you out with that.
The actual marking, right?
Yeah. And so they can help you out with, like I said, when we were going out, we would say, hey, here's 2 or 3 places that we know can help, make this marking for you to put it up on your facility. And so they'll have resources like that. But like I said, it's just one, seeing if they even recognize what that sign is, and if 2, making sure that they're okay. We need to start incorporating that into our pre-plan. Which if they're familiar with it, I would imagine that they're probably going to be requiring it in most cases, not all. They're probably going to be requiring it, so they probably at least went out to the facilities and gave them a heads up. But again, at a minimum, calling them out there and saying, hey, we heard about this firefighter safety building marking system. One, is it required? We're looking at helping you all out as first responders showing up at our facility. Can you help us out with how to actually classify it, where to put it at, there's nothing within an NFPA standard that tells you the height, as far as how far above the ground you install it. But we would tell people about 6 to 8 feet on average is where we want to usually put that, to where I'm not having to look, like you talk about with the generator, the doors behind the generator. I don't want to have to look behind, so low I can't see it behind a bush or something, right?
Right.
So easily visible from the address side of the facility. So just simply reaching out, and they're going to be the fiber only going to be a load of resources for you.
Yeah, you mentioned the community site. For anybody that's listening, head over to the Safety Pro Podcast community. The link is in the show notes. You can watch the full video of our interview if you're just listening in podcast land, and we'll have some examples of what we're talking about as we're talking, so you'll be able to see that. But that would be helpful. Of course, Drew, Aero Safety, right? Partner in safety with the podcast. So this is what you help companies do, right?
Right.
You help them figure this stuff out. And you mentioned something that's important for us to repeat. This isn't for the building or the company to comply with something like an OSHA reg or some kind of hazmat marking or HAZCOM marking system or labeling system. This is specifically for responders. And
Correct.
So start with them. That's great advice. Reach out to them and work with them and find out what they like to see or what they would follow, because you're right. It's weird that we would have this variance in that marking system, but some do have specific call outs, right?
Yeah.
They've seen.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, add that to your list, safety pros, of things to do when you're doing your emergency planning and review of your emergency response plan of your facilities. Reach out to your local responders and make sure that your buildings are marked for them, for their benefit, not just to keep them safe, but to facilitate a prompt and speedy rescue, or God forbid, right, or protecting of the property. So
yeah,
good
absolutely.
stuff. All right, Drew, where can people find out more about Aero Safety and what you do for your clients?
So you can always go to our website, aerosafetyus.com. You can reach out to us. Reach out to my specific email is drew@aerosafetyus.com. And we're all over social media. So any social media avenue, you're going to find us on there. So be glad to help out. Anything topic, whether it's this stuff or anything else, we're glad to help out.
And if you mention that you heard about Aero Safety from the Safety Pro podcast, what do they get, Drew?
25% off your first service. So it doesn't matter how big or small your quote is. You can have a $10,000 estimate, or you can have a $100 estimate. It doesn't matter what size it is.
You were going to say $10, weren't you?
What's that?
You were going to say $10, $10,000 or $10.
But
doing for $10, Drew.
Right. I'll give you a cup.
Hey,
but if you mentioned that you heard it on the safety, there we go.
You get a hat or a cup, right?
That's right.
Right.
If you mentioned you heard it on the Safety Pro podcast, we'll give you 25% off your first estimate.
That's a deal. Awesome. All right, Drew, thanks again for hanging out with us. And, I can't wait for this episode to drop, because I think it's good information. And I think more safety professionals partnering with their facilities managers and operations managers can really improve how responders gain access and get an understanding as to what is in store for them when they gain access. That's key. Right. Good
Absolutely.
stuff. All right. Thanks. All right, there you have it. A great conversation with Drew, as always. Remember, go to aerosafetyus.com. Let them know that you heard about them from the Safety Pro podcast. Get 25% off your first estimate. That's a good deal right there. If you are in need of safety services, you're going to want to check them out. They are the official safety services provider of the Safety Pro podcast, for good reason. Watch the full video of our interview and all of our other interviews where we record the video over at the Safety Pro podcast community site. Join the community of safety pros today. It's free to sign up. There is a premium side if you want to support the podcast and engage in the conversations. You do have to be a premium member to post your own content and to comment and reply. Otherwise, if you just sign up for free, you can watch all of the videos that we have available on the free side. So all of our interviews. The premium side, obviously, we have a lot of training videos and content that we're continuing to develop over on that side as well. So either way, go check us out at the Safety Pro Podcast community. The link is in the show notes, and I will talk to you on the next Safety Pro Podcast.